Hey everyone, welcome back to the lab. In this video, we're going to be talking about F# and Entity Framework and solving for GroupBy aggregations that are throwing the could not be translated error. So I'm building a web app that creates and ranks full stack project ideas. For ranking, I'm using a naive voting system, which means I need to aggregate across individual votes to figure out what order to display them in. Now, I'm using F# and Entity Framework with a Postgres DB, so this aggregation maps pretty nicely with the GroupBy, sum aggregation, then order by total descending, which is, usually pretty easy to do in SQL and LINQ. That said, I ran into a lot of problems writing this query with F# and Entity Framework, writing code that compiled, but when I ran it through an error like this, the LINQ expression could not be translated. So in this post, we'll explore the issues I was facing and how I eventually worked around them using F# and Entity Framework. Now, quick shout out, if you want to get started building with F# and Entity Framework, I have some guides, but I also have CloudSeed, which is a full stack project boilerplate that comes batteries included with an example project, F# Entity Framework, all containerized so you can run it locally or deploy to help you get started a bit faster. You can find out more about that here at CloudSeed. Okay, let's start with a voting system overview. So I want to start off with a general overview of the system to provide some context before diving into code. Now, the data model of this project is very simple. First off, we just have project ideas, which are the ideas to display the entities, if you will. And then we have project idea votes, which is really just a vote mapping a user to a project idea and whether it was like an upvote or a downvote. That's it, pretty simple. And so if we assume that this is the model, then finding the top project ideas is pretty easy. All we got to do is group all of our votes by project idea. We just sum all the values of the votes. And then we just have to order the votes by, the totals descending. And then we just take the top n of those you want to display. And this is how you can get like pagination and stuff like that. Now, there are, of course, many other ways to build and model this, but this is the one I chose for this iteration. So this is what we'll be diving into here. All right, so now let's dive into the Entity Framework GroupBy aggregation could not be translated error. And so my first iteration tried to use Entity Framework idiomatically to solve this via LINQ. We're basically doing exactly what I just showed you above, just kind of translated to LINQ. And so we're trying to group by the project idea. We're trying to sum all the votes of those, within the group. We're trying to take the ones with votes greater than 0 because we don't need to look at the negative ones. Then we order the votes by descending, and then we take the top n projects. And so we can see kind of like how this looks in code. So let's assume that I have like a little intermediate object here for project idea ID and total votes. This is kind of like the grouping, if you will. And then so to get the ideas or the IDs here, we're going to look at the context, look at the DB set here, which is the votes. We're going to group by the idea ID so that we get this grouping by project. And then we're going to select these into this intermediate object I had. So we have the idea ID as the key, and then the total votes is the sum of the group by vote value. And then we're doing some operations here, right? So we're only taking the ones where total votes is greater than 0, order by descending here. We're just selecting the ID out because that's all we need. And then we're doing pagination here. And then we're just materializing it to a list. And so this compiled fine, but the problem happened when I tried to run it. So the LINQ expression could not be translated is the error that I was getting. You can kind of see the full error here. We got an invalid operation exception. It's saying that the LINQ expression on this DB set couldn't be translated. And it kind of shows the code that I was running here. And then the suggestion is to rewrite the query in a form that can be translated or switch to client evaluation explicitly. And so basically what I got out of this error is that the query I wrote could not be translated to the DB layer. Something I was doing here, EF could not figure out how to turn that into SQL. And so the suggestion, therefore, is to either change the query so that it can be turned into SQL, or to materialize the query earlier so that you pull the raw data from the DB using the logic that it can understand, and then you just do the non-translatable operations in your app logic. And so an example of this, and kind of what I did before I figured this out, was basically to move my toList async right here, and then to do all of this filtering and stuff in memory afterwards. And now this works, and again, this is what I did in the interim while I figured out what was wrong, but it's not really optimal. The whole idea of a DB is to efficiently do data operations in one place. And if we're constantly materializing raw data into our app logic to process it, we're going to be hogging our app processing. We're going to be using a lot of its memory, especially if we're trying to do like a full DB set on all the items we have. That's a lot of wasted memory. And we're going to be paying very large network round trip costs. And network is often in web apps one of the most expensive things you can do. And so all in all, these are things we want to avoid. And so I had experimented with different LINQ queries to see if I could pinpoint the issue, and it turned out basically any operation after the GroupBy that accessed values of the intermediate result object led to this error. So something is weird with the GroupBy object, even though there seems to be many EF examples that use this. And so what I'm talking about here is like the GroupBy object, and then I created this intermediate. Basically, anytime I was doing this stuff that accessed something on the intermediate object, it was failing. Fixing the EF GroupBy aggregation. So I tried a lot of things to get this working, but ultimately the only thing I found that allowed this query to run in the database was to lose the intermediate result object. This makes the code less readable in my opinion, and may make the SQL more convoluted. I don't know, I didn't actually check, but it seems like it might do this. But it does seem to compile and execute as expected in my database. And so here's the changed query. And so we're basically doing the same thing, right? So we're accessing the DB context, we're grouping by this, but the difference is we're not creating that intermediate object, and instead we're just doing all of these, I don't know what these are called, like windowing or projections or something like that, directly. And so, I'm just getting the totals like this, and then making sure it's over 0. And then I'm getting the total again here and ordering by descending on it. And then I'm just selecting the key that's already in the grouping. And then we're just doing the pagination here. And so really the only thing I've done is just removed the intermediate object, and I'm recalculating those things off of this kind of primitive core GroupBy grouping object. And so this works. Like I have this running in production now. It works. It's all in DB, great. And my research into why this happened in Entity Framework didn't turn up much, but there does seem to be some edge cases around trying GroupBy aggregations with non-scalar primitive values. So example is, I was creating an intermediate object and then I was trying to do operations on it. There seems to be a lot of edge cases around that, especially when you have it connected with the GroupBy aggregation. I don't know why, but that just seems to be a lot of edge cases. And it mostly seems to work better if you're just using primitives, like these are all ints, and they're just, projections or whatever it is on top of the GroupBy. And so they're more primitive. They're more like easy scalars. They're, ints or they're strings or whatever it is. Seems to work better. And so my hypothesis is that the F# object was just confusing Entity Framework, even though a lot of examples online seem to show you being able to do this in C#. So I don't know what the difference is here. I tried anonymous objects. I tried this, specific record for this. I tried using specific record with specific rows and stuff, but all of it was confusing. So at the end of the day, I just removed it, and it seems to translate better. So this isn't necessarily optimal, but at least we aren't doing the computations in memory now, and it seems to work. And so if you're stuck on this, hopefully you can use this in your own project. Next. So despite all the possible edge cases in any framework, I still find it to be pretty ergonomic for the common 80% cases, and still choose to use it in most of my projects. I've used a lot of other things in the past, like Dapper F#, a lot of these things, but I think overall Entity Framework is pretty solid for most operations, and I really like the ability to use LINQ in most cases to be pretty flexible. And so even though these 20% cases like this one are like really annoying, I still find it's usually more productive for me than trying to use some of these smaller libraries. The question for you is, what are you using for data access in F#, and what edge cases or issues are you running into with it? I still don't think there's like a perfect, data access ORM. They all kind of have their trade-offs and stuff. So curious to see what everyone's using. Now, if you like this post, you might also like getting started with F# and Entity Framework, or you might be interested in the HAM stack, a simple scalable tech stack for building modern web apps fast and cheap. And finally, you might be interested in Cloud Seed Quick Start. Get started with a full stack F# app in 10 minutes. And this is basically how I start all of my projects these days. A very lean, simple core to just spin up a web app so I can just get started building quickly. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.